Hi, everyone. I'm Rabbi Ariella Rosen. I'll be with you for the next few sessions. It's great to be here. Welcome to the conservative Masorti Tikkun Leil Shavuot. We're here for another 20 hours or so. And not us personally, but some of us will be here. Our next session is being taught by Rabbi Sidney Rubenstein, who is the rabbi at Congregation Agudath Achim in Shreveport, Louisiana. Rabbi Sidney especially enjoys teaching, learning, reading, writing, and chatting about Jewish approaches to self-care, the status of women in Jewish law, and biblical notions of love of God. Rabbi Sidney, please take it away.
Chag Sameach, everyone. I am so excited to also welcome here two members of our congregation here in Shreveport, Louisiana, Dr. Richard Zweig and Rebecca Austin. It is wonderful always to learn with them. So they're going to be joining in to answer some of the big questions we'll be asking today. Now, I'm going to ask everyone watching here a crazy question, and I'll give you a minute of silence to think about the answer. The big question is, who or what is God? Now, keep in mind that whatever answer you're thinking about might be different than the answer that you gave yesterday. For me, God is my motivation to get out of bed every morning. God is both within and above each and every one of us. God not only created me, but sustains me. God cares about me and us and our world, partly because God is intimately within us. I personally feel God most readily when I'm cuddled on the couch with my dogs and my husband, when I'm on the phone with my little brother, or when I'm teaching a student who really gets it. I'm curious, Richard or Rebecca, you're put on the spot with this big question right at first, but who or what is God to you?
Rebecca?
Oh, okay, I guess I'm up first. And it's really interesting because we've had similar studies in other times, and what I thought of this time was a little different, and it was that right choice. Not necessarily, that God is in that perfect result of a situation when you didn't have the right knowledge, and that, I guess, ideal outcome of your decisions.
Thank you, Rebecca. How about Richard?
Yeah, well, from my perspective, I'm a doctor, I'm a scientist, I try to be. And from my perspective, God is fundamentally unknowable. So I think that the religion has much to teach us, and we have much to learn from God and what God represents and means, but that fundamentally God is just completely unknowable. And that's what I know of God, is that I don't know of God.
I love that too. And I love that the three of us all had radically different answers to that question. I would imagine that if I were to ask that question again tomorrow, the three of us would have radically different ideas from what we said today as well. Now, the first commandment of the 10 commandments of Aseret HaDibrot begins, Anochi Adonai Elohecha, I am Adonai, your God. Now, the your here is second person singular. We're talking about the individual you. So today we're going to be asking this question, what might I am Adonai, your God mean as a commandment? We'll come back to that question in a few minutes, but that's our real big question today. What in the world does that commandment mean? Now, we are not the only ones who have different ideas about who God is or what God is. So we're going to read some midrash from some rabbis who had different ideas of who God is. These rabbis wrote in the 5th or 6th century of the Common Era, and they wrote about what that first commandment, Anochi Adonai Elohecha, might mean. Now, I'll ask a lot of questions throughout the next half hour or so, While Rebecca and Richard are here to present their answers, I also invite you, wherever you're watching from, to think up your own thoughts during this exploration. If you have my source sheet, whoever is behind the controls, you're welcome to put that up now, as we'll be reading from Sikta de Rav Kahana. Most of this I'll read in English, but some of it I'll read in the Hebrew as well. Another explanation, because they've been having a conversation for a while, another explanation for the words, Anochi Adonai Elohecha, I am Adonai your God. Rabbi Hanina bar Papa said, the Holy Blessed One appeared to them at Mount Sinai, the people standing at Mount Sinai, as angry faces, complacent faces, rational faces, laughing faces. Furious faces are for Torah, since when a person teaches her child Torah, she needs to teach it with fear. Now, the word for fear here can also be seen as awe. Complacent faces are for Mishnah. Rational faces are for Talmud. Laughing faces are for Agadah, the stories in rabbinic text. The Holy Blessed One said to them, even though you see all of these images, only Anochi Adonai Elohecha, only I am Adonai your God. So they're seeing so many different faces of God, but really there is only one God through all of this. So my question for anyone watching and for Rebecca and Richard is, what faces of God do you see when?
Well, what I would say is this, is that, again, with my theme is basically that our understanding of God is really through metaphor more than through, it's Torah, but if it's written in the hand of man, even if dictated by God on Mount Sinai, still it comes through the human eye, through the human expression. So it's all anthropomorphized to some degree, even the concept of face, so I stand by my view of just really not knowing, so it's hard for me to say I see any particular face. Mm-hmm. I could see how I feel each day. I could see how my wife is reacting to me, or other people are reacting to me, or impatience, or the world, or and I could say this is a beautiful day, and God's smiling. But I think that's all really maybe powerful and important, but nevertheless metaphor. God's not smiling at me in a sunny day. It's a beautiful sunny day.
Mm-hmm. So you might see God as smiling, but even if you see God as smiling, that doesn't necessarily mean that God is smiling. That's just kind of your perception. Is that right?
Yeah.
Nice. Great. How about Rebecca? It looks like Rebecca has, she's sort of connected.
I'm saddened that I missed what Rich was saying. Unfortunately, it was all as my internet was failing.
So the big question here is, what faces do you see of God when? When do you see different faces of God?
One of my roles in our global is teaching at the religious school, and I'm active with different learning groups, like this, but within our community. And I think that's a lot of the time is I see it through the other people's responses to learning, and to these insights that kids have come up with that, are just amazing to me.
Right. God's face shines through their comments. I know that learning with these students for me is how I get so many of my ideas. I'm going to share something that a student said a little bit later today. All of these faces, these students' faces, or the sun shining in the sky, they're all the face of God, or perhaps in Richard's terms, representations of the face of God. And that's not counterintuitive, I don't think, because we each have different faces for different realities. I know that my Bima face is different from my visiting my family face. And sometimes it's really shocking to me to see the face of someone I thought I knew, but a face that's different than what I've expected. So too with God, that the more we delve into God's personality, the more faces we may see. Right? The more experiences that we have in life, we may see God's face as angry, as loving, and that might be different every single day. Let's go on to the next part of our midrash here. You can bring up the source sheet again. Rabbi Levi said, the Holy Blessed One seems to them like a statue that has faces in every place. 1,000 people gaze upon it, and it gazes back at each of them. So too, when the Holy Blessed One would speak, every single Israelite would say, with me, the speech is speaking. It's not written here, Anochi Adonai Elohechem, I am y'all's God, which makes sense. We're here in the South. We use that kind of language. Anochi Adonai Elohechem. Rather, it's written, Anochi Adonai Elohecha. I am your singular God. For me, I met God through my family first. I grew up in a family that had huge holiday dinners. None of these dinners were kosher. Lots of dairy kugel next to the brisket, but everybody would fly in from around the country to come to these Rosh Hashanah meals prepared for my bubby, the matriarch, prepared by my bubby, the matriarch of the family. And so Judaism for us was joy. I saw God first in that joy of family. And that continued later, where really what brought me closer to Judaism was in high school. I tell this story a lot. I see Rebecca smiling because I tell this story probably too often, but I came home from high school one day and my little brother, who's 15 years younger than me, was running around the house and he was screaming the Shema at the top of his lungs. And the Shema was one of the only prayers that I knew well. And I would always say the Shema to myself when I was sad or happy or nervous. I would just sit in the corner and close my eyes and say it very quietly. And then my little brother comes along, and he's 3 years old at the time, and he's screaming the Shema and just running around and dancing. And to me, at that moment, I just saw how God could be so different to so many different people. And that's really when I started looking into Judaism. Right? So for me, I had that kind of first meeting with God through my family, whereas I know that others have their meetings with God through text or through big life events or circumstances. I'd love to go back to the text, and in a few minutes we can hear if Rebecca and Richard have their personal experiences as well. But let's go back to that source sheet. And we'll go down the page a little bit. All right. Here, Rabbi Yossi, son of Rabbi Hanina, said, according to the koach of each and every one, the speech would speak. I'm going to preface this section by doing some study on a word. So koach is often translated as strength, but it seems to mean something a little bit different here. So that's why I haven't translated that word koach. We're going to figure out how would we translate koach here. Rabbi Yossi, son of Rabbi Hanina, said, according to the koach of each and every one, the speech would speak. Don't be surprised at this, for when manna fell for Israel, every person tasted according to her koach. The babies according to their koach, the youngsters according to their koach, and the elderly according to their koach. And it gives a commentary with a few different verses of where manna shows up in the Torah. The babies according to their koach, just as babies nurse at the breast of their mother, so too what she tastes in the manna. As it said, and its taste was like that taste of rich cream. And so the word shade, like the breast of their mother, is similar to the word of rich cream, so shad. and the youngsters according to their koach, as it says, and the food that I have given you, bread and oil and honey, I have fed you. Okay, so for babies, it tastes like one thing. For youngsters, it tastes like another thing. And the elders according to their koach, as it said, and its taste was like wafers in honey. And just as with the manna, whereas every single person tasted according to their koach, so too, when God spoke, every single heard according to their koach. So I think when I think about tasting according to their koach, I think a little bit about cilantro. Some people love the taste of cilantro. To some people, cilantro tastes like soap. So too, manna. So back to the God conversation. David said, the voice of Adonai is in the koach. You might know this with Kol Adonai ba'koach on a Saturday morning. But the voice of Adonai is in the koach. God did not say, David did not say, the voice of Adonai is in God's koach. Rather, he said, the voice of Adonai is in the koach of every single person. The Holy Blessed One said to them, this was not for the sake of you hearing many voices. Rather, it was so that they would know that it was me. Anochi Adonai Elohecha, right? We're not talking about God's koach. We're not talking about all y'all's koach. We're talking about the koach of every single person. So Rebecca and Richard, my big question to you all now is, what in the world does koach mean in this midrash?
Yeah. Well, some comments you gave to us, which I'll credit you for, but I like it. You've written here, and it covers it: ability, strength, preference, all of that. And so it's more than just strength. It's to each his own, and possibly to each his best. You might add. That's where the strength part might come in. It's not just how you are at any time; it's how you are at your best. It's not just a good food; it's the best food. It's the preferable food. So it's at its best or the best.
So it's your favorite food. Manna would be your favorite food, and God would be, what I would hear of God at God's best, or God would be the best version of God that I could hear.
Sure. Which also relates to the notion of loving God, with all your heart, all your the Shema prayer,
So it's almost as if, it almost seems like you shall love your God then could be, you shall see God in the best possible light.
Yeah, sure.
Love that.
So I'm going to go a different direction because, that's what I do. Because I think that the strength here is not me seeing God one way, but also that you see some God another way. And it's only when those come together that we get the strength. We're talking like a rope that is many different threads, but the strength comes from it all coming together. And it goes back to what Rich was saying about God being unknowable. Because what I see and what he sees and what you see, Rabbi, and what everybody watching at home sees, all those things together is not what I see, not what you see. There's no ideal there. And I think that one of our challenges is to see how others see God, to get a better understanding of them and of God.
Wonderful. So we can't really get that koach of God, the voice of Adonai is in the koach. We can't really get just a standalone koach of God without each of our individual representations of that koach, in a sense.
Yeah, and also some of this has to do with covenant. I think it, that as Rebecca was saying, it's not God, it's not individually us or as a group. It's the combination. That rope is in covenant, is the covenant with God.
Yeah, and I see that too in that bit where it says, David did not say the voice of Adonai is in God's strength. The voice is reflected by our individual strengths. God is only, God is great in God's self, and our world can't see God as that great until God gets that support from all of us with our individual representations of God. I think a lot here about a bat mitzvah student I've been studying with. Her parsha has to do with the moment that that Moses asked to see God's face, and so her big question was, what does God look like and sound like? And the answer that she came up with for anybody who's going to see her bat mitzvah going to be at her bat mitzvah in September, you can cover your ears, but her answer is that we each hear God in the way that we need to hear at any moment in time. So each of us needs to access God differently. She says that best view of God for each of us is what we need to hear at a moment in time. We might need to hear God as a mother figure. We might need to hear God as, the hard truth, but we hear God as we need at every moment in time. Now, what I love about this midrash is that the rabbis are practicing exactly what they're preaching. Each of them are seeing this moment at Sinai in completely different metaphors that in the end come to pretty similar conclusions. That God is very personal and unique to each person, but at the same time, God is ultimately one. So they are showing this through showing God in different images. So it's kind of meta. But I do want to ask that big question I asked at the beginning. From all of this, what are we being commanded to do with Anochi Adonai Elohecha, I am Adonai, your God?
Okay, I guess I'm tagged again. I would say it's to acknowledge and develop that relationship with God, and that because really, until we accept the existence and that relationship, none of the rest of it has any basis. If a random person on the street tells me don't do that, I'm not necessarily going to listen to them because I don't know who they are. But that relationship with God is what makes the mitzvot commandments.
So if I hear you correctly, Anochi Adonai Elohecha means I need to create a personal relationship with God, or not create, but I need to have a personal relationship with God.
Right, and acknowledge.
Great. So do I acknowledge that to myself, or do I acknowledge that publicly?
I would say both. I think that Judaism is a group experience at its best.
Great. Richard, anything to add or alter there? What are we?
A little bit. It's similar, but not exactly the same. To me, the first commandment, and I've read a bit, listened to other people too, but it's a statement of faith, really. It's basically, just as the Shema says, you shall love the Lord your God, and love could mean different things. You could love a poem, you could love, to me, this is a statement, you must have faith, you must believe. It's not just the kind of relationship, it's even more fundamental than that. It's a statement of that you must believe your Lord, my God, and then it took me out of the land of Egypt. So there's the particular there too, at least in this formulation, the Ten Commandments is directed to the people of Israel specifically, and I think that's part of the first commandment as well. But ultimately it's a statement of faith.
Great. So you're
adding faith.
Great. So you're even bringing it somewhere a little bit different too. You're saying that you have to believe in God, but not just that, but you have to believe that there's a God of Israel, which we didn't even touch on today. That could be a whole 10 other shiurim.
Yeah, that's right.
Wonderful. And
I think that's Rich and I's skill is creating questions that we can talk about for hours.
Right.
Exactly. Right. And that's honestly why I invited the two of you here today, is because I think that you're an example of how we're separated by our differences in ideas, but we really when we join together and share those ideas, share those different ideas of who God might be or what God might be, we get to some sort of unity, we get to some sort of greater understanding. And that greater understanding can lead to respectful and effective conversation, not just in these learning groups at a Tikkun, Leil, Shavuot, but out there in the world. This study that we do together is a laboratory for the kinds of conversations we can have out in the world. So throughout this week, I will encourage you, everybody watching now, to ask your friends and family what they think about God. Notice how few of them have the same ideas, and also notice what's similar about what they say. And of course, notice how your ideas about God this week might be different from one day to the next. So thank you for letting me teach today. Thank you, Rebecca and Richard, for learning with me. And thank you
for the invitation.
Thank you.
And thank you, Rabbi Rosen.
Thank you all so much, Rabbi Sidney, Rubenstein, Rebecca, Richard, all of you. Thank you so much for prompting all of us to think and reflect so personally through the teaching and through your own reflection as well. We do have a couple of minutes. So I'm wondering if I could ask you a question to think about for the next 2 minutes, which is, as you were sharing personally, I was thinking a bit about how even as we're invited to create our own personal relationship with God and to maintain that, we also have this sort of unity of practice. And you sort of got at this in some of your questions, that we sort of have shared behaviors that we all engage in, that we sort of have in common. So I'm curious if you have any thoughts on how we sort of do some of the same things, but also maintain that very personal and maybe different kind of relationship to God between ourselves.
I think that that's why we come to shul. I think we come to shul to share, to see a whole room of people who think differently, but think enough the same and practice enough the same that we can have that common ground. Whereas during services, we find that common ground because we bow at the same time and we sing the melody together and we tap our feet together. But at the oneg or at Kiddush lunch, we can come together and know that even though we study the same texts, we look at it differently. And we use that as a sort of laboratory about how to have these conversations in life outside of shul.
I think it gives us also a common language to be able to share our ideas and our perspectives.
Yeah.
Thank you so much again to all three of you for teaching us for this last half hour.
Thank you.
Any parting words before we transition?
I've just loved this space, and I really have enjoyed the past couple of hours of just seeing so many different people from the movement come together. So I'm going to be keeping this on for a while just to learn some more. So thank you so much.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Chag Sameach.
We are going to continue now. So for those who are just joining or joined in the middle of the last session, we are at the Conservative Masorti Tikkun Leil Shavuot, continuing on through the next session.